The Riverside Women's and Family Shelter had been a fixture in the community for 23 years, a lifeline for mothers fleeing domestic violence, families escaping homelessness, children who needed safety when nowhere else was safe. The three-story building on the edge of downtown housed up to 40 people at a time, provided case management, job training, childcare, and hope when hope seemed impossible. Director Patricia Williams had run the shelter for 15 years, building it from a struggling nonprofit barely making rent to a well-funded operation with a $5 million annual budget and partnerships with businesses and city government. She was beloved by the staff, by the residents, by the board of directors who gave her complete autonomy to run the shelter as she saw fit, which made the audit results all the more shocking. Marcus Johnson stood in the shelter's common room at 3 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon, his expression neutral despite the bomb he was about to drop. At 56, Marcus had been a forensic accountant for 30 years, specializing in nonprofit financial analysis for the state attorney general's office. He'd seen embezzlement, fraud, and mismanagement in every form imaginable, but he'd never seen it at a homeless shelter for women and children. Until now. Patricia stood beside him, her face a careful mask of professional concern. The staff had been called in, all 12 employees, from case managers to maintenance workers. Several residents watched from the hallway, sensing something was wrong. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," Marcus began, his deep voice carrying authority but not aggression. "As you know, I've been conducting a routine financial audit of the shelter's accounts over the past 3 weeks. This is standard practice for any nonprofit receiving more than $1 million in state funding." Patricia nodded along, her expression showing nothing but professional cooperation. During this audit, Marcus continued, "Looking directly at Patricia, I discovered a discrepancy. $2 million in donations and grants received over the past 5 years cannot be accounted for. The money was deposited into the shelter's accounts, but there's no record of where it went. No invoices, no receipts, no documentation showing it was spent on shelter operations." The room went dead silent. Patricia's expression didn't change. "That's impossible. I personally oversee every financial transaction. There must be some mistake in your analysis." "There's no mistake." Marcus opened the folder he'd been holding. "I've triple-checked every account, every transaction, every receipt for the past 5 years. $2 million came in and disappeared. Either the documentation has been destroyed or the money was diverted elsewhere." "Are you accusing me of stealing?" Patricia's voice was carefully controlled, but steel underneath. "I'm stating facts. $2 million is missing. You're the only person with full access to all accounts and the authority to approve all expenditures. I'm asking you, in front of your staff and residents, where is that money?" The shelter fell silent. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Layla, a 17-year-old resident who'd been living at the shelter for 3 months after escaping her abusive stepfather, stood in the hallway watching. She clutched her backpack tighter, feeling sick. This place had saved her life. If it was corrupt, if the money was being stolen, "I don't have to answer to you," Patricia said finally. "I answer to the board of directors." "The board of directors received a copy of my preliminary report this morning," Marcus said calmly. "They've placed you on administrative leave pending investigation. As of now, you no longer have access to shelter accounts or authority over operations." Patricia's mask cracked. "You're destroying this shelter. I've dedicated 15 years of my life to this place. These women and children are here because of me, and you walk in here with your spreadsheets and your suspicions and try to destroy everything I've built. I'm trying to protect what you built. If $2 million was stolen from this shelter, that's $2 million that should have gone to helping the people you claim to care about." Marcus's voice was quiet but carried weight. "That's housing, food, medical care, job training, stolen from the most vulnerable people in our community. I didn't steal anything." Patricia's voice rose. "You're making a mistake. Then show me where the money went. Show me the receipts, the invoices, the documentation. Prove me wrong." Marcus held out the folder, "Because right now the evidence shows money coming in and disappearing. If you have an explanation, I'm listening." Patricia looked around the room. at the staff members who'd worked for her for years, now watching with varying expressions of shock, confusion, and dawning suspicion. At the residents in the hallway, some of whom she'd personally helped place in jobs or housing. At Layla, whose eyes held betrayal. "I want a lawyer," Patricia said finally. "That's your right." Marcus closed the folder. "The State Attorney General office will be pursuing criminal investigation. If you cooperated now, showed remorse, helped recover the funds, it might make a difference. But if you fight this, if you make us prove every detail..." He paused. "The evidence is already overwhelming. We will prove it. The only question is whether you help these people you claim to care about, or protect yourself." Patricia turned and walked out without another word, her heels clicking on the floor until the door slammed behind her. The shelter remained silent. Then Layla spoke up from the hallway, her young voice breaking the tension. "Is this shelter closing? Are we being kicked out?" Marcus turned to face her, and his expression softened. "No. The State Attorney General's office is appointing an emergency director, and the board is implementing oversight procedures. The shelter stays open. You stay housed. This place continues its mission. But it's going to be under actual scrutiny now, to make sure this never happens again." "Why didn't anyone notice before?" asked one of the case managers, a woman in her 30s who'd worked at the shelter for 7 years. "How could $2 million disappear and nobody knew?" "Because Patricia had complete control," Marcus explained. "The board trusted her, gave her autonomy, didn't ask hard questions, and she exploited that trust. She was excellent at her public-facing work, running programs, helping residents, building partnerships. That gave her cover for the financial mismanagement happening behind the scenes." "What did she spend it on?" someone asked. "We're still investigating. But preliminary evidence suggests a second home, luxury vacations, a lifestyle far beyond her declared income. She was good at hiding it, using cash transactions, shell companies, creative accounting. But the money trail exists, and we're following it." The next 3 months were chaos. The investigation confirmed what Marcus had found. Patricia had embezzled $2.3 million over 5 years, using increasingly sophisticated methods to cover her tracks. She'd started small, a few thousand here and there, then grew bolder as nobody questioned her. She'd created fake vendors, inflated expenses, diverted donations meant for specific programs into accounts she controlled. She pled guilty eventually, faced with overwhelming evidence. 5 years in prison, full restitution required, though recovering the money was difficult since she'd spent most of it. But the real story wasn't Patricia's fall. It was what happened next. The State Attorney General's office, embarrassed that the fraud had gone undetected so long, implemented new oversight requirements for all nonprofits receiving state funding. Mandatory audits, financial transparency, board training. The shelter's board was entirely replaced, with members who actually understood financial oversight and nonprofit governance. And Marcus Johnson, the forensic accountant who'd uncovered the fraud, did something unexpected. He retired from the Attorney General's office and volunteered to serve as the shelter's interim financial director, unpaid, just wanting to help rebuild trust and systems. 6 months after the initial audit, Marcus stood in the same common room, this time for a community meeting. The shelter was full again. 40 residents, families rebuilding their lives. Layla was still there, working toward her GED and planning to start community college in the fall. "I want to address the question everyone's been asking," Marcus said to the assembled residents and staff. "Why did I push so hard? Why didn't I just quietly report this and move on?" He paused, looking around the room. 20 years ago, my sister ended up in a shelter like this one. She was fleeing an abusive husband, had 2 small kids, nowhere to go. The shelter saved her life, gave her time to breathe, helped her find a job, supported her while she rebuilt. She's successful now, safe, thriving. Her kids are in college. Marcus's voice roughened. "So when I found evidence that someone was stealing from a place like this, stealing from women and children who have nothing, who are desperate, who need every dollar to survive, I couldn't let it go. Patricia Williams was stealing hope from the most vulnerable people in our community. That's unforgivable." Layla spoke up from her seat. "But the shelter stayed open. We're still here, because places like this are too important to let fail. Because the mission matters more than any one director. Because you all, Marcus gestured to the residents, you deserve better than what Patricia gave you. You deserve a shelter that's actually using all its resources to help, not enriching someone who's exploiting your vulnerability. What happens now? Asked Maria, a mother of 3 who'd been at the shelter for 5 months. Now we rebuild. We've implemented new financial systems, new oversight, new transparency. Every dollar that comes in is tracked, verified, audited. The board actually reviews finances now. We've hired a new director, someone with a clean record and a commitment to doing this right. And we've recovered about 40% of what Patricia stole, Marcus added. That money is going directly into programs. New job training, childcare expansion, housing assistance. The money she stole is coming back to help the people she stole it from. 2 years after the audit, Marcus sat in a coffee shop with Layla, who was now 19 and finishing her first year of community college. She'd moved out of the shelter into transitional housing, was working part-time, and planning to transfer to a 4-year university. I've been thinking about that day, Layla said, stirring her coffee. When you told everyone about the missing money, I remember thinking the shelter was going to close, that we'd all be back on the streets. I was terrified. A lot of people were, Marcus agreed. But you didn't let that happen. You could have just filed your report and walked away. That was your job, right? Find the fraud, report it, move on. But you stayed, helped us rebuild. Why? Marcus thought about his sister, about the shelter that had saved her, about Patricia Williams sitting in a prison cell because she'd betrayed the most vulnerable people in the community. Because numbers aren't just numbers. That $2 million represented lives, meals, beds, safety, hope. When someone steals from a homeless shelter, they're not just committing fraud. They're stealing from people who have nothing. That's personal to me. You changed everything, Layla said quietly. Not just catching Patricia, but showing us that someone cared. That we mattered enough for someone to fight for us. Most people don't do that. Most people should, Marcus replied. That's the problem. We accept that corruption happens, that people exploit the vulnerable, that nothing will change. But it doesn't have to be that way. Layla nodded, then smiled. I'm going to major in accounting, by the way. Someone's got to keep watching these nonprofits, making sure the money actually helps people. The world needs more accountants with heart, Marcus said. People who see beyond the numbers to the lives those numbers represent. 3 years after the audit, the Riverside shelter was thriving. The new director had expanded programs, increased transparency, and rebuilt community trust. The shelter now served 60 people at a time, with better success rates for transitioning residents to permanent housing and employment. And every year, on the anniversary of the audit, Marcus Johnson stood in that common room and reminded everyone, staff, residents, board members, what had happened. Not to shame Patricia Williams, who was serving her sentence, but to remember that transparency matters, that oversight matters, that the most vulnerable people in the community deserve leaders who actually care about them, not exploit them. The shelter fell silent when Marcus asked about the missing $2 million. But what followed was louder. The sound of a community refusing to accept corruption, of systems being rebuilt with integrity, of people deciding that women and children fleeing violence deserved better than someone stealing from them. That's what happens when one person sees the numbers and asks the hard question. That's what happens when someone refuses to just file a report and walk away. That's what happens when a forensic accountant decides that his job isn't just about finding fraud. It's about protecting the people that fraud hurt. Marcus Johnson could have just reported the missing money and moved on to the next case. Instead, he stayed, rebuilt, showed up. Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do is refuse to accept that corruption is inevitable. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand in a room full of people and ask the question everyone's afraid to answer. And sometimes, the most valuable thing you can offer is not just expertise, but the willingness to use that expertise to protect the powerless instead of just advancing your career. That's what separated Marcus Johnson from just another auditor. He saw the faces behind the numbers. And when those numbers didn't add up, he didn't stop until the truth came out and the people who'd been hurt were protected. That's what justice looks like. Not just catching the criminal, but making sure their victims survive and thrive despite the betrayal. The shelter fell silent when he asked about the missing money, but it stayed open, rebuilt stronger, because he cared enough to ask in the first place.